The Christian right is truly in lockstep with the Gnostic truther movement. And the things that I'll be talking about in this video and the next couple ones will help to lay an important foundation of proof for just how disturbingly similar the conservative Christian community is with the Gnostic New Age conspiracy crowd. These two communities are militantly marching in lockstep against the so-called Satanic kingdom of darkness, which, as I've been contending, is ultimately a prelude to the destruction of Mystery Babylon at the hands of the beast kingdom. And that's what we'll be unpacking in great detail moving forward. I'll be showing how the Christian right and the Gnostic conspiracy crowd talk about this satanic enemy in nearly identical ways, which is an eerie indication that this is all building toward a false kingdom of God unified under the beast, who will lead a religious crusade against the harlot of Babylon, the dwelling place of demons, which is Jerusalem, the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, Revelation 17:18.
It is a tissue of lies designed by a death cult, satanic death cult.
A bunch of globalists that run the world, and their money runs it. And I'm going to tell you something. It is nothing more than a satanic death cult.
Satanic death cult.
Adolf Hitler called the Jews satanic. He rose up to stop what he called the international Jewish swindle, international communism. And him trying to take out the Jews in his attempt to stop the international satanic Jewish plot to control the world was a picture, microcosm, of the beast's crusade against the harlot. And this all has roots in Gnosticism and its hatred of ancient Judaism and the Old Testament, or some version of that. And it ties in with what's developing more and more today with the increasing satanic panic mentality and atmosphere that so much of the Christian apologetic community on YouTube is helping to foment. And all this exposure of the Great Reset and the New World Order and Satanism and evils in pop culture, satanic imagery at the Super Bowl, in rock and roll, in Disney movies, and the Zionists behind it all. Many Christian teachers are right to point out that there will be a Holocaust of sorts during the Great Tribulation. But what they fail to understand is that the Holocaust carried out by Hitler was done to suppress a satanic threat. Long before the satanic panic of the 1980s, Hitler spread his own satanic panic in Germany. Mein Kampf was a warning about a satanic threat to Germany's national sovereignty, to Germany's moral compass, and Germany's economic strength. And you guys will see just how widespread this mentality is becoming today, in America especially, but also around the world. And the fact that all these seemingly disparate movements and communities appear to have some kind of underlying disdain for the Jews or for Israel, or some obsession over exposing Satanism and communism and wokeism, is no coincidence. This is another New Ager named Michael Salla. He's an author who I mentioned in the last video. He runs a website called Exopolitics that I showed these two articles from on Satanism and pedophilia. This one called Epstein Murder to Hide Satanic Pedophile Network, Manipulating Global Elites. And this one, U.S. Special Forces Arrest Satanic Pedophile Group. Right, so this is from that same site. And here's another article. Did President Trump endorse Q info on secret indictments of pedophile network? Right, so again, the common theme of exposing pedophilia. And at the end of the article, he mentions the rabbit hole, saying this: Trump is encouraging those in the American public who are ready to go down the rabbit hole to learn the truth about systemic corruption, powerful pedophile networks, and secret space programs. And so that's another perfect description straight from the horse's mouth about what the rabbit hole entails. Learning about the corruption, the pedophilia, the Satanism, etc. of the elites. Now here's a clip of Alex Jones from years ago. I'm guessing this is around 2016, peddling this exact same narrative. He mentions the rabbit hole and the matrix in the context of talking about the satanic occult elites who engage in child sacrifice and torture and pedophilia and corruption and things of that nature.
You have to make the decision that you want to see the matrix. You have to make the decision that you want to go down the rabbit hole. They're over-the-top insane, over-the-top diabolical, over-the-top evil. And the average person just does not want to grab a child out of a playground and torture them for a month at a subterranean torture base while worshiping Satan. The average person doesn't want to get with 15 people in black robes and torture a 2-year-old for 3 days, sucking the blood out of them, like Satanists do with cutting them all over their body. And then all these major elites, when I've infiltrated their organizations and their groups, they are the most superstitious, occult-obsessed people you could ever imagine, and they don't want you to know about any of this stuff, so you're totally spiritually blind, spiritually stupid, so that you don't understand that they're using occult systems of manipulation to control the planet. All occult means is hidden. The CIA that's been secret since 1947 and above the law is occult. We are the anti-occult. We're here to expose the fraud. We're here to bring it out in the light.
So seeing the matrix and going down the rabbit hole is learning about these occult satanic elites who wear black robes and torture children and manipulate and control the planet. Right? As Michael Salla of Exopolitics said, to go down the rabbit hole to learn the truth about systemic corruption and powerful pedophile networks. And Tim Ray, likewise, talking about the elites and their secret Bilderberg meetings to discuss how they'll implement psychological warfare and such against the human population. Okay, so same theme over and over. And note how Jones tries to paint it in a spiritual light, right? He says that you're spiritually blind if you don't know about this stuff. You're not awake, which means learning about this stuff will spiritually wake you up. Okay, that's the Gnostic awakening. To wake up spiritually means to go down the rabbit hole and learn all this information about the satanic elites. And the Christian right, as you guys will see, is speaking of spiritual warfare in these exact same terms. Nick Caterano as well, who calls himself a Christian, says that he reads the Bible. He described this as a spiritual war too.
Look through it already and just realize we're in a spiritual war.
So the point is, both the Christian right and the Gnostic New Age communities, they're approaching and teaching spiritual warfare in a disturbingly similar way, exposing the satanic corruption of pop culture and Hollywood and the elites, and thinking that that's what Paul meant in Ephesians 5:11 about exposing the unfruitful deeds of darkness. The Christian right essentially has the spiritual discernment level of Alex Jones. That's what's scary about all this. And Jones says, we're the anti-occult. We're here to expose the fraud and bring it out into the light, the false light. And see, this is the thing. This is how the church sees itself, as the ones to expose the fraud and corruption of the satanic occult elites. This is how most professing Christians are approaching spiritual warfare, just as Alex Jones does. They think spiritual warfare entails exposing the Satanism and corruption in society. They think they're the ones to expose the fraud and Satanism in the outside culture, doing exactly that which Paul commanded us not to do, judge the world. It reminds me of a scene from The Boys where the main superhero, Homelander, he's pridefully up in front of everyone on this stage, saying how he's going to be a tool of God's judgment. And that same self-righteous pride has completely overtaken the modern church. So, in the film The Matrix, Neo undergoes a Gnostic New Age awakening as he goes down the rabbit hole to learn the truth about the prison that he's in and the architects behind it, which is what the Great Awakening deception is about. It's about learning about the dark agenda of the elites and the Satanists and the Freemasons and so forth. To go down the rabbit hole is to go on a Gnostic journey. Even if you're supposedly learning about the Gnosticism that the elites believe in, you're still going down a Gnostic road yourself because you're supposedly waking up to the matrix system that the elites have created and all the lies that they've supposedly made you believe. Okay, this is fundamentally what ancient Gnosticism was, as we'll get into more in the next part. Even the channels that claim to expose the false light, and there are many of them, most of them still make it all about the elite, Masonic, Satanic, Babylonian agenda, and therefore are themselves promoting the actual false light Gnostic deception, even as they claim to be exposing it, which makes them even more deceptive. The reason I feel that this is important to cover is because the church is thinking along similar lines as this man. This is a more subtle form of New Ageism that the Christian church is being deceived by. This isn't yoga and occult meditation and the Enneagram and all that obvious New Age stuff that the Christian apologetic community does, tons of videos on, pretending that they have some great discernment for exposing deception. Guys, Allie Beth Stuckey exposes the Enneagram, and Sid Roth exposes yoga. It doesn't take much discernment to see the evils of yoga and the Enneagram. What I'm talking about is a much subtler and more deceptive form of the New Age and Gnosticism, primarily through trutherism and conspiracy theory and the Matrix narrative, which a lot of Christian teachers and influencers are starting to push very heavily. The very same ones that claim to expose the New Age deception, like Doreen Virtue and Melissa Dougherty and people like that. These so-called former New Agers that are actually pushing a much more deceptive and subtle form of New Age deception themselves. More on that later. Now understand, this came from the mind of a New Ager, probably from a vision or dream that came from an evil, lying spirit. I'm showing you this for a reason, guys, because again, this is how much of the modern church sees the second coming of Christ, coming to destroy this obvious, satanic, child-sacrificing, tyrannical threat. And that's why they will be deceived, right along with the New Agers and Truthers, into worshiping the Antichrist as Jesus. And it explains the increasing satanic panic mentality, and everyone left and right exposing Satanism in pop culture. Both the New Age and the Christian right are converging in a united war against the satanic Freemason elites. And we're in the exposure phase right now, right? Before you fight an enemy, you have to know who the enemy is. The enemy has to reveal itself. And that's what the world is figuring out right now. They're figuring out who the common enemy is. The way this painting depicts the devil is exactly how the Christian right conceives of the devil and the Antichrist. An obviously evil, demonic figure with horns and wings. For example, look at how similar the devil in this New Age painting is to the satanic Baphomet statue that Christians have gotten so worked up over. Right down to the wings, the horns, and even the preying on children element. This is exactly the kind of demonic stuff that the Christian right, the Christian apologetic and discernment community absolutely loses their minds over. Oh gosh, a satanic statue. Oh my, satanic imagery at the Grammys. Satan performed at the Super Bowl. Guys, all that stuff is Gnostic nonsense. Satanic panic deception that is feeding the beast, so to speak. The New Age and the church essentially have the same view of the devil and the Antichrist, and are ultimately going to war against the same enemy. And it's all pointing to Mystery Babylon, who will be hated and destroyed by the beast. And you will see more and more evidence of this in this video and the ones to follow. And Alice Bailey's conception of the Antichrist, which again is very similar to the Christian right's conception of the Antichrist, further proves this point. For example, in a treatise on white magic, she said, "He is the true Antichrist who through hypnotism and mass suggestion draws a veil over the world and forces men to walk in the great illusion." So hypnotism, mass suggestion, this would be the black magic of the black forces who deceive and hoodwink and create the illusion. So the veil of black magic illusion is created by the Antichrist. Alice Bailey's version of the Antichrist draws a veil of black magic over the world and constructs the great illusion or matrix that humanity is supposedly under. Exactly how it's depicted in this painting by Neil Haig, with the lion tearing the veil of black magic. Right, you can see the green rings circling above the people. That's illustrating how they're under hypnosis. This is the New Age version of the Antichrist. And it's how most of the modern Christian community perceives the Antichrist as well. As a black magic, Jezebelic, leftist, satanic, child-sacrificing, tyrannical dictator. And I say all this because it all points back to this great deception that's depicted in this painting of a false Christ spirit tearing the veil of the matrix illusion created by the satanic New World Order elites, which, I say again, is the same exact view of the Antichrist system that's been adopted by the conservative Christian crowd. And I'm not just talking about the super patriotic, QAnon, Trump-supporting Christians. I'm talking about the entire conservative Christian community, which would include the Christian truthers and all Christians who consider themselves anti-woke to some extent or another. Now, one final example. We've already seen how this false light piercing of the veil idea is being spread in the NAR and the Jezebel narrative through guys like Lance Wallnau and Sean Foyt. But now I'm going to show you guys how it's subtly working its way into the anti-NAR Christian crowd, or at least through those who portray themselves as being anti-NAR. As I said earlier, this is not just the NAR. People think that the false light is just the NAR and the New Age. That's not true at all. I started talking about this Great Awakening deception years and years before I ever knew about the NAR. And like I said, even a full year before the QAnon stuff started. And this stuff is also spreading in a rather disturbing way by those who, ironically, claim to be exposing New Age and NAR deception. This is how deep this deception is. This is the main distinction between true biblical warfare and false light warfare, which is the culture war and casting out demons. Yes, we do wrestle against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, as Ephesians 6 says, but we're not literally wrestling against them. We're wrestling against their schemes to make us sin and fall into deception. Job did not wrestle with the devil. He wrestled against the temptations that the devil put before him to turn against God. He wasn't literally wrestling with the devil or any principality. Okay, you win the battle against Satan's schemes to deceive by walking in obedience to the Spirit and submitting yourself to God. We put on the armor of God in order to have the power to stand against the devil's evil schemes that are meant to make us fall into deception and sin. Satan wanted Job to turn against God. That was the whole point of attacking his family and his possessions. It wasn't just to kill and destroy for the sake of killing and destroying, as many false light teachers are saying, that Satan wants to destroy the family. They naively think of Satan as a comic book or movie villain that just wants to destroy and conquer. Their immature view of the devil is a testament to their own spiritual immaturity. But Satan's purpose in killing and destroying was to make Job fall away. And Job won his battle by submitting himself to God and praising him despite his circumstances. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away, he said. Right? Notice he didn't say the devil took away. He said the Lord has taken away, which means he's saying the Lord took away his family, not the devil. He didn't bring up the devil at all. Waging the good warfare, as Paul commends Timothy to do, is about holding faith and maintaining a good conscience. It's that simple. But that's not exciting enough for most people. They have to have this dramatic wrestling with the devil version of warfare that makes them feel powerful, makes them feel like the devil's always after them, and it boosts their ego. right? They get to say Jesus' name and make the devil run in fear. Truth be told, the biblical version of warfare just doesn't get views and attention. But Satan at the Grammys, that's the kind of stuff that gets views and attention and subscribers. And in this increasing satanic panic climate, there's more and more of a market for that kind of stuff. And that market will only keep growing the closer that we get to the tribulation, right? When false Christs and false prophets start rising up and performing great signs and wonders against, the so-called demonic kingdom. Anyone who has supported this fraud should be ashamed of themselves. All Doreen has done over the years is refine her ability to deceive. Because before, when she was in the New Age, she was only deceiving unsaved people. But now, she's deceiving some of the elect. She's only become a better deceiver. Much better, in fact. And as I'll be getting into at some point in the future, Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson of GoodFight Ministries are in some grave and serious error for promoting this actual Jezebel to the body of Christ. They should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. And please understand something, because some people have failed to understand the connection here. Their spiritual blindness regarding Doreen is directly tied to their hyper-focus on exposing Satanism in pop culture. I've been trying to warn for quite some time now that there's something not right about this exposing Satanism culture war mentality. And it has yet again proven to be a problem, without exception, as I said back in part 2. You turn your judgment to the outside world, and you become blind to the corruption in your own midst. It's a very simple concept that Christians still fail to understand. I've been warning about where this is all heading, and many people still lie to themselves to avoid reality and continue clinging to their idols. And GoodFight Ministries is probably the best example of this, because even they, who I used to support myself, I gave them the benefit of the doubt for quite a while, probably longer than I should have. Even they are showing signs of a serious and dangerous lack of discernment. The cracks are starting to show. In fact, they're enormous crevices at this point because they are pushing false light doctrine themselves. For example, back in 2021, they did a video with another UFO researcher named Gary Bates, who's also good friends with Joe Jordan. And GoodFight has been doing more alien deception videos lately too, in addition to all their, Satanism videos, in which they have continued to promote Gary Bates. And this is not even the tip of the iceberg. GoodFight is getting worse and worse. And they're getting more caught up in all this stuff that I've been warning about for over 6 years now. Joe Schimmel is arguably the grandfather of the satanic panic mentality. GoodFight has been promoting the satanic panic stuff for decades with their absurd Gnostic sensationalist documentaries like They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll and Hollywood Unmasked and many others. And by the way, unmask would be a synonym for lift the veil. Russell Brand in his podcast with Joe Rogan about the veil of government being lifted, he also described it as a mask. Listen.
Yeah, it feels like a mask and a veil, like a mask and a veil, like.
So he used both mask and veil because they're similar terms referring to something that hides the real nature of something. A mask is something of an illusion that the false light is lifting and destroying. And again, to show the comparisons of this with how the false light talks about Jezebel, they also talk about unmasking Jezebel. For example, here's Hakeem Collins, a self-proclaimed prophet. He's been on TBN, Sid Roth, Jim Baker. He talked about unmasking Jezebel in a video that he and his brother did with Jennifer LeClaire. I showed this in my Jehu videos.
That's what that agenda does, that spirit does. It makes it look good. It's masked. And so that is our job as of God and as apostles, is to rip the mask and to unmask Jezebel and to expose the agenda.
There's a witchcraft veil over the minds and perception of the masses. I think God's raised you up for us to be able to pierce the veil off of the minds of our people.
So our job as apostles and prophets is to unmask Jezebel. Just as Lance Wallnau talked about piercing the veil of Jezebel witchcraft, that's masking the true nature of communism. Another example, this is the late John Paul Jackson, former host of a show on Daystar called Dreams and Mysteries. He wrote a book called Unmasking the Jezebel Spirit. In other words, unveiling the Jezebel spirit. So unmasking Jezebel is another way of talking about piercing the veil of Jezebel and Satanism and things of that nature. And so there's a concerning parallel here in the title of Good Fight's documentary, Hollywood Unmasked, especially considering that Hollywood is one of the main pillars of the so-called Jezebel system that the false light wants to expose and dismantle. And if you notice, they even have a mask on the cover that's similar to the mask that John Paul Jackson has on the cover of Unmasking the Jezebel Spirit. And the description of the documentary is even more telling. Look at what it says here. Is it true that an Antichrist agenda dominates the mindset of those who run the Hollywood media machine? So they're calling Hollywood a machine. This lines up with false light terminology to describe the dark side, the matrix, the machine, the simulation, etc. Now listen to this. Journey with us as we explore the dark recesses of the entertainment industry. Kind of sounds like journey with us down the rabbit hole, doesn't it? Guys, this is horrible stuff. Journey with us into dark recesses? Does that sound like something that a Christian ministry should be saying? Can you imagine the Apostle Paul, for example, saying, journey with me as we explore the dark recesses of the Roman Empire? I hope not, because if so, your view of the Apostle Paul is horribly off. This is the language of the false light right here. Good Fight Ministries is not pulling people out of the rabbit hole. They're pulling people into it by their own admission, in their very own words. They're admitting that this is what they do, and it gets worse. So journey with us as we explore the dark recesses of the entertainment industry and pull back the curtain. There it is. Pull back the curtain. Tear the veil. Right? When Christ tore the veil of the temple, it's also translated as the curtain of the temple. Okay? So pull back the curtain on the most powerful mind-shaping institution in the world. Guys, this is the kind of stuff on New Age networks like Gaia. If you want to keep defending Good Fight, you are doing so at the expense of your own soul. I'm not kidding. This is how serious this is. This is horrible, horrible stuff. And to further show just how horrible this is, I'll refer back to this book, Lifting the Veil, Signs and Symbols, by false light Christian truther Randy L. Smith, whose book shows the pulling back of the curtain on Satanism, just as Good Fight Ministries' Hollywood Unmasked pulls back the curtain on the entertainment industry. Same exact language. And if that wasn't enough, Chapter 7 of the book is called The Illuminati and the Entertainment Industry. So both Good Fight Ministries and Randy L. Smith are lifting the veil on the satanic entertainment industry. This is False Light 101, guys. And the implications of this are even more serious when you consider who is ultimately controlling Hollywood, at least from the human perspective, as we'll get into in future parts. Again, this is building up to the beast's rebellion against Jerusalem the harlot. Good Fight Ministries is participating in this false light unveiling and has been for a long time. And I know defenders of Good Fight who are still lying to themselves about what's going on here will say, but they're not into flat earth and the Book of Enoch like this guy is. They will try to cling to anything they can to justify their continued support of Good Fight, even in the face of blatant evidence. That's not the point. The point is that Good Fight exposes the very same things that people who are into flat earth and the Book of Enoch expose. Their version of spiritual warfare is virtually indistinguishable from guys like Randy L. Smith. That's the point. Good Fight doesn't have to be in complete theological alignment with every aspect of the false light in order to be a part of it. Sean Foyt isn't flat earth either. And I don't hear any defenders of Good Fight arguing that Sean Foyt isn't false light just because he isn't flat earth. And as far as I know, he's not into the Book of Enoch either. You don't have to be into flat earth and the book of Enoch in order to qualify as false light. Those are just some of the characteristics of the more extreme false light types. This is a spectrum, just like anything else. You don't have to be on the most extreme end of the spectrum in order to be false light. Just like you don't have to be the most extreme communist to qualify as a liberal, right? It's a spectrum too. Same with Hebrew roots. There's some that are not as extreme as others in how they adhere to those laws. And some still might say, okay, fair point, but Sean Feucht is NAR, and GoodFight is vehemently against that. No, they're not. If they were, they'd expose Tina Griffin for her promotion of NAR and deliverance ministry teachers. But oddly enough, they embrace her. I wonder why. They are complete hypocrites who act like they're so against these things with their soapbox preaching against Bill Johnson and Bethel, while they promote and collaborate with other deceivers. Apparently, as long as you have no direct connection to Bethel, you're okay in the eyes of Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson. You can be connected with anybody. You can be connected with TBN, Vladimir Savchuk, Joe Jordan, Henry W. Wright. It doesn't matter. You can promote Vladimir Savchuk, and you're okay, just as long as you have no direct connection to Bethel or Sean Feucht. You can even promote Michael Brown, right? Frank Turek called Michael Brown his friend back in 2018. And Frank Turek is one of the featured teachers on GoodFight Ministries website, as are many other complete deceivers like Alyssa Childers and others. It's absolutely disgusting. Again, I say, you guys at GoodFight Ministries are complete hypocrites. And while they may not be as extreme in their doctrinal aberration as the rest of the false light, GoodFight has clearly been in the business, and I do mean business, of exposing and unmasking things that the false light correlates with the Jezebel spirit, such as Hollywood, Satanism, and the Great Reset. Joe Schimmel has even referred to Oprah Winfrey as America's Jezebel. He did 2 whole sermons on it. This is a complete and dangerous misapplication of Christ's reference to Jezebel in Revelation. The Jezebel in Revelation that Christ was warning about was in the church. And Joe is blind to the Jezebels in the church, or at least some of them, because he's too busy focusing on the fake Jezebels in the outside culture, all the while promoting actual Jezebels in the church who are leading Christ's servants astray, which is what Jezebel in Revelation does. One of the defining characteristics of the false light Jehu movement, the Great Awakening, is calling out the Jezebels outside the church, in the culture. I've established this in nearly 9 hours of content. And that's what Joe Schimmel does, as well as Chad Davidson. They call out the so-called Jezebels in the culture. We need to understand the ramifications of a theological statement like that, especially in these days. To call Oprah Winfrey America's Jezebel is not something to be taken lightly. That's not something to be excused or justified with, oh, well, he didn't mean it like that. He just means this or that. No. I understand that Oprah Winfrey is a deceiver of sorts, but she's not claiming to be in the faith, and she's not leading Christ's servants astray. Doreen Virtue and Tina Griffin, however, do claim to be in the faith and are leading Christ's servants astray. So Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson can sit there all they want and expose Sean Feucht and Bill Johnson. But the truth is, Joe Schimmel applies that scripture in a concerningly similar way to how the Christian Dominionist movement does, because he is also deceived by the culture war mentality and collaborates with some of the worst deceivers of our day. Joe Schimmel has no business whatsoever calling out any false teachers. Take the log out of your own eye first, Joe. This is just the tip of the iceberg. They've been leading the charge in this satanic exposure for decades. And lately, they've been pumping this stuff out more and more and more, taking the devil's bait like the naive spiritual leaders that they are. And it has clearly led to a continuing decrease of discernment. And it also appears that Joe Schimmel is quite deep in this false spiritual warfare mentality as well. For example, the way he speaks rather fondly of many aspects of the Jesus movement of the 70s is cause for concern. And he seems to have a very, very dangerous view that true Christians can be tormented by demons to the point of literally going insane and yet still be saved. I'm not kidding, and I'm not exaggerating. I don't have time to get into it now, but there are some serious concerns regarding someone who used to be in Joe Schimmel's fellowship at Blessed Hope Chapel, who went borderline insane from demonic oppression. And Schimmel recently came out in defense of this man's Christian testimony. And I suspect that he did so to defend his own ministry because of the man's former ties to it. In other words, because of this man's former ties to Blessed Hope Chapel, Schimmel felt the need to publicly declare him as a Christian, because if he wasn't, then Schimmel would look like he allowed someone who wasn't saved or who had fallen away to continue in his fellowship under his nose. And at this point, Schimmel is simply too proud to entertain the latter possibility. So he would rather just say that he was a Christian who was bravely battling demons and make some serious doctrinal compromises in the process, because that makes Schimmel look better. It's truly disgusting what's happening with that ministry. The problems with Good Fight are quite deep. Again, I haven't really even begun to scratch the surface here. Schimmel has become the very thing that he claims to warn about. Or perhaps he always was that. So people who want to continue to pretend that Good Fight is exposing the false light just because they've done a few videos exposing the incredibly low-hanging fruit of Bethel Church are lying to themselves. Good Fight is very much promoting false light deception. Just because they've done videos against Bethel and Sean Foyt doesn't mean a thing. Big deal. And as I've said repeatedly, the false light is far bigger than just the NAR. I don't know how many times I have to say this before it starts to sink in with some people. If after decades in ministry, you lack the basic discernment to recognize problems with someone like Doreen Virtue, you're dangerous to the body of Christ. And you have no business leading anyone, plain and simple. I don't care how many subscribers you have. In fact, that's usually a red flag. Right? If you have so many subscribers, that means you're appealing to something that people like. Right? Maybe you're one of the false teachers who are satisfying the itching ears of the people in the last days. Have you considered that? You're to be marked and avoided, Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson. You're dangerous. And I guarantee they will find some way to spin Doreen Virtue's clear promotion of deliverance ministry, because they have to in order to defend themselves. They would rather defend themselves and their name than defend the truth. And plus, they've already done this before. Tina Griffin, for example, good friends with Joe Schimmel for 25 years, and she promotes deliverance ministers on her counterculture mom show, like Vladimir Savchuk. But they'll sit there and talk about Jack Hibbs' evil associations and expose him, but say nothing about Tina Griffin's evil associations, which are just as bad, if not worse. Please, Joe and Chad, find a way to spin that to make yourselves look like you were innocent. Absolute hypocrites. And you defenders of Good Fight should be ashamed of yourselves. 25 years, and Joe Schimmel sees no problem with Tina Griffin, who's yet another Jezebel. And I'm willing to bet that his friendship with her and others has a lot to do with his desire and Chad's desire to spread their ministry, to sell DVDs and get subscribers, because networking with people helps get subscribers and sell videos and other merchandise. This is the way of the world. This is what the world does to grow their businesses and channels. Networking and collaborating. They're still selling their Left Behind or Led Astray documentary, for example. The main thesis of which I have no issue with. I believe pre-trib is deception. But it's clearly been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jacob Prasch is a monster. And he's on that DVD. So is Joel Richardson of FAI Studios, who's been on Jim Bakker's show, one of the most obvious false teachers of our day. Good Fight is still selling that DVD because it brings in money. Like I said, Joe and Chad are the very thing that they claim to warn about. Doreen Virtue is a spiritual fraud who is unwilling to give up the limelight of attention and learn what it really means to truly repent of one's sins. She's an actual Jezebel, leading Christ's servants astray. And Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson will have to pay dearly for tolerating her. I pray God has mercy on their souls. And the doctrinal issues here are not the only problems. I've seen the damage that people like Doreen Virtue have done in putting stumbling blocks before the brethren and causing others to share in the leaven of hypocrisy. And GoodFight Ministries is spreading that leaven as well. I have former friends who style themselves as great discerners who have blindly embraced this deceiver because they have no discernment. And they've embraced her primarily because of her endorsement by GoodFight Ministries. They are partners with Doreen Virtue in spreading leaven, hypocrisy, confusion, lies, and division in the body. Christ's biggest problem with the Pharisees was not their doctrine. It was their hypocrisy. But please, keep exposing the satanic rituals of Rihanna, all the while you partner with false teachers and promote them to your audience, thinking that you're doing God's will. You guys deserve the harshest kind of rebuke. And in regard to Joe Jordan, the people that he networks with are just as bad, if not worse, than he is. For example, L.A. Marzulli. Here's Marzulli's book, The Alien Interviews, which Joe Jordan is in, featured as a recommended book on his website. Marzulli has been on Sid Roth's It's Supernatural and has even collaborated with Sid Roth and other false teachers on projects like this book called Sooner Than You Think, with others like Perry Stone, Tom Horn, who's also been on Jim Bakker's show many times and talks about the Great Awakening. He has a book called Final Fire is the Next Great Awakening Around the Corner. And also Paul McGuire of God TV, which Joe Schimmel has been on, by the way. Here's a couple videos he did with Paul McGuire a few years ago. L.A. Marzulli is also good friends with Gary Stearman and the guys at Prophecy Watchers and Skywatch TV, which are basically tantamount to Sid Roth. They push the Book of Enoch and all kinds of Gnostic false light doctrine, including the Matrix transhumanist tyrannical Antichrist narrative that the New Age pushes. Joe Jordan was also in something called Project Stargate, produced by Skywatch TV, which is all about the UFO phenomenon. It has Paul McGuire and Michael Heiser and Russ Dizdar and several other suspicious characters. All these guys are false. They have successfully disguised themselves as the ones who are exposing the great deception, when in reality, they are the very ones promoting the great deception. This is an enormous network of the most prolific and effective deceivers in history, and GoodFight Ministries is in partnership with them. These so-called former New Agers, like Doreen Virtue, Joe Jordan, Melissa Dougherty is another one, Stephen Bancars, L.A. Marzulli is also a former New Age hippie by his own admission. I'm telling you guys, these so-called former New Agers, with these From New Age to Christ testimonies that are so popular and always draw so many views and so much attention, they have rapidly become the main vehicles of this great deception to the church. These former New Agers are everywhere, and they're sneaking in false light doctrine, false spiritual warfare, and trutherism into the church under the guise of being Bible-believing, born-again Christians. And their gimmick, which so many Christians find convincing, is to expose the obvious New Age stuff like yoga and meditation and the Enneagram, which gives them this convincing disguise of being anti-New Age, all the while they gradually sneak in the more subtle deceptions like trutherism, the New World Order Matrix narrative, the culture war, exposing Satanism and Jezebel, and a counterfeit spiritual war against the kingdom of darkness, which is all pointing toward the harlot and her destruction by the beast. That'll be the culmination of this counterfeit spiritual war. These people are the harbingers of the coming beast kingdom. And think about it, guys. Would that not be the ultimate deception? What if the very Christian influencers and teachers who for years have been portraying themselves as the greatest exposers of demonic deception, like the NAR and the New Age and UFOs, are actually themselves promoting the greatest deception of all? You know, I've heard that for years, that the alien deception would be the great deception or the great delusion. But I've seen overwhelming evidence by this point that the so-called alien deception feeds into deception and the false light narrative. Just consider this. What if the alien deception was itself part of a greater deception? And what's also interesting is that New Agers will often describe the archons as looking like ETs. So the demonic aliens are essentially acting as the archons for Christians. This is yet another area where the Christian right and the Gnostic truther narrative converge. They both have a similar view of the demonic realm. It's part of the false light Gnostic war against Satanism and black magic. In fact, Aleister Crowley, a black magician and Satanist, one that GoodFight Ministries can't stop talking about, apparently. They obsess over Aleister Crowley. He supposedly conjured an entity named Lamb who looked like an ET. Here's a picture of him. Many of you have probably seen this before. And this again supports what I'm saying about ETs being on the dark side and the so-called alien deception being a Trojan horse for the false light narrative. More and more Christians are starting to buy into this idea that demons look like aliens, just like many New Agers do. And it makes sense that deliverance ministry, false light, would be used against these, alien-looking demons that are conjured through black magic, right? Again, white magic versus black magic, false light versus dark, Gnosticism versus Satanism. And as many of you probably know, this alien disclosure stuff is really picking up. I've seen more and more reports from mainstream news sources talking about aliens and UFOs in a more official capacity now. And what this alien disclosure stuff is doing is making Christians go, oh boy, here it is, more alien stuff. Fake alien invasion is about to come. No. The UFO stuff might amp up a little bit more, but there's not going to be a fake alien invasion. The idea that there will be a fake alien invasion is itself part of the false light deception. I've heard that same idea in the New Age truther crowd for years. Guys like Stephen Greer, for example, believe that the government will stage a fake alien invasion to help push the New World Order agenda. So this is yet another idea from the New Age that Christians are parroting. And once again, primarily at the hands of so-called former New Agers, Joe Jordan, L.A. Marzulli, Doreen Virtue, etc. That's no coincidence, guys. The fake alien invasion narrative is deception. And look, even this channel that I mentioned before, Lift the Veil, he did a live stream recently called Fake Alien Invasion. This is a widespread idea within the New Age and conspiracy crowds. Here's another one on BitChute called Project Bluebeam, the 4 stages of fake alien invasion explained. And it has this, holographic picture of Christ in the sky, the idea that the government will stage a second coming. But again, that's what the New Age believes about the New World Order, that they're crazy Christians and Jews who are just staging things to make the Bible seem true. And look at the name of the channel, Bunny Crumbs, with a logo of a rabbit that says follow, as in follow the white rabbit. And Doreen Virtue and Joe Jordan talked about Project Bluebeam in their interview. The fact that the Christian right is parroting the same kinds of narratives that the New Age and conspiracy crowds are pushing is a serious, serious problem. And GoodFight Ministries is part of that problem. So anyway, we see the common theme of the piercing of the veil across the board with the New Age and conspiracy crowd, as well as the Christian right. The piercing of the cosmic veil is part of the false light's dismantling of the black magic illusion, as heralded by Alice Bailey. and as depicted in this painting by a New Ager with a cosmic lion tearing the veil of the Matrix. You pierce the veil, you shatter the illusion. That's why the New Age talks about piercing the veil, because they want to shatter the world illusion created by evil spirits and black magic elites controlling the world. And the Christian right is on this same exact trajectory. Right? As Lance Wallnau said, people are being raised up to pierce the veil of Jezebel's witchcraft over the minds of our people. Just as Alice Bailey said that the Antichrist was the one who drew a veil of great illusion over the earth. And then now we have those who are supposedly against the NAR, like GoodFight Ministries, making documentaries like Hollywood Unmasked, asking you to journey down the rabbit hole with them. Again, there's an eerie similarity between the New Age and Christian conception of the Antichrist as a tyrannical, black magic, satanic figure that seeks to dominate and control. And this has been the popular depiction of the Antichrist that's been popularized for decades by the Christian truther community, which Joe Jordan, L.A. Marzulli, Paul McGuire, Doreen Virtue, GoodFight Ministries, and many others are all a part of. Contrary to popular belief, it is much easier and safer to expose Jeffrey Epstein and Rihanna for their satanic allegiances than it is to call out the true depths of corruption within the church and within ourselves. You don't believe me? Watch the pushback that this video gets. Everyone wants to talk about the signs and symbols of the occultists and Satanists, all the while not realizing that as they supposedly learn about the occultism practiced by the political and Hollywood elites, that they themselves are gradually falling deeper and deeper into an occult mindset as they go down the rabbit hole or journey into dark recesses, as GoodFight Ministries says, to learn about the secret dealings of those in positions of power and influence. And when you realize that everything is a lie and that you've been lied to by the government, by the media, by the education system, etc., and you realize that they're all Satanists doing horrible things to people, that's when you supposedly wake up. You transcend or shatter the illusion. You awaken to the illusion when you realize that everything is a lie. You escape the Matrix. You've joined the Great Awakening. And ultimately, you awaken to Mystery Babylon and are now on the road to worshiping the beast when he rises up to destroy Mystery Babylon, the creator of the Matrix, and ushers in a brief period of false peace on the earth. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them.
If you are no longer subscribing to that, you are leaving the Matrix and entering the new earth.
There's been a cross-pollination of all these elements over the past several decades. And this cross-pollination is happening at a faster and faster rate. Right? The New Agers are quoting the Bible more. The Christians are sounding more New Age and conspiracy-minded. The Dominionists are exposing the Illuminati. The conspiracy theorists are talking about ushering in the kingdom of God. And this cross-pollination will continue as we get closer and closer to the tribulation. And again, the common element here is the Matrix narrative, which is what the New Agers and truthers have been peddling for decades. And it's now seeping into the Christian mainstream, as we'll be exploring more in later videos. Doreen Virtue and Tina Griffin, both of whom have been foolishly embraced by GoodFight Ministries, are quite deep into trutherism. And GoodFight Ministries, by embracing them, are blindly acting as a gateway to all this false light deception. It's truly horrible what's going on. Okay, Kara Mosher is another deceived truther that GoodFight has recently started embracing. She's also a former New Ager, by the way. So that same trend continues. The real false light is completely separate from the New World Order. It's not some psyop or Masonic agenda. The false light deception, as I have defined it from the very beginning, is completely opposed to the entire New World Order, Great Reset, Freemasonic, Babylonian, Tower of Babel Matrix agenda. It's a grassroots movement about exposing the elites, whether it's the Freemasons or satanic celebrities in Hollywood or the communists or the woke leftists or the corporations, or Jezebel, or the Great Reset elites in Davos, or whatever. It's deep spiritual deception centered around exposing very obvious evil outside the church, all the while turning a blind eye to the evil within the church. And Christians who are too focused on judging the world and exposing the evil in pop culture, like Joe and Chad of GoodFight Ministries, instead of the evil in their own hearts, will get caught up in this deception, if they haven't already. With both Gnosticism and the conspiracy narrative, the saving knowledge is the knowledge of what the bad guys have done, instead of all the good that God has done to save you from all the bad that you've done. I've talked about this before. It's all about focusing on the darkness out there instead of the darkness in your own heart. Just like Truth Unedited, saying that his awakening was all about him realizing that he was a victim of someone else's sin. But that's not how true awakening, according to the Bible, works. In both Gnosticism and conspiracy theory alike, worldly knowledge plays a central part in man's spiritual awakening and salvation. And as we'll get into more later, this is essentially how the modern church is thinking as well, which is why I want to spend so much time laying the New Age and Gnostic foundation to all this, because then you'll be able to see on your own how the church is thinking along these same lines. We must learn about these secret satanic agendas in order to be fully equipped in this spiritual war and help get people saved. It's the same bottom line Gnostic mentality, but they justify it by calling it evangelism. Anybody trying to wake you up to Christ through the knowledge of global conspiracies or satanic agendas is feeding you a false Gnostic gospel, period. Or at the very least, they're giving you a gospel heavily tainted by Gnosticism. So by revealing the nature of man's imprisonment at the hands of the Illuminati, Satanists, and New World Order, the false light conspiracy movement is spreading a Gnostic gospel of salvation and carrying out Alice Bailey's white magic agenda, which is to tear the veil, shatter the illusion, destroy the matrix, release the prisoners of the planet. And how is that done? By exposing the agenda and the lies of the black magicians, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the satanic global elites, the New World Order. And if you're exposing this prison planet or this matrix in any fashion, whether it's the elites, the Satanists, the Freemasons, mind control, the lies in the media, Hollywood, Satanism at the Super Bowl and rock and roll, or whatever it may be, you're participating in this Gnostic white magic agenda of releasing the prisoners of the planet, which is paving the way for the Antichrist to eventually be raised up against Babylon. Because according to Alice Bailey herself, if you're exposing the illusion of the black magicians, in other words, if you're exposing the matrix, the lies of the mainstream media, the Satanists, the globalist agenda, and so forth, you're doing the work of the white magic New Age disciple. So the real and literal practical exposure and defeat of the Illuminati, Freemason, Satanists is arguably the most important aspect of the New Age agenda. What good is yoga and meditation if there's a satanic elite controlling the planet, right? In fact, New Agers are increasingly using meditation to help eradicate the satanic cult. Like this article from 2017 said in response to Pizzagate, mass meditation event for arrest of elite Washington pedophile ring. And I think these meditation events that New Agers hold coincide with the prayer meetings and prayer gatherings and worship gatherings that are happening on the Christian side. And so if you're exposing the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum and the Freemasons and the Satanists and all the politicians and the media and Hollywood, rock and roll, and the Super Bowl and all that, you are participating in the New Age agenda of lifting the veil that's been hiding the satanic elites. Remember the cover of this book, Lifting the Veil, where the curtain is being pulled back to reveal the satanic symbol. Or the picture by Neil Haig, where the lion is tearing the veil of the satanic matrix. This is the New Age agenda. This is what it's all about. Exposing the Satanists. That's the whole culmination and point of the New Age movement. You might think you're exposing the New Age by calling out the Satanists in Hollywood, calling out Jennifer Aniston for her seances or whatever, like Spencer Smith and GoodFight Ministries do. But what you're actually doing is exactly what Alice Bailey defined as the very work of the white magician, which is to release the prisoners of the planet by exposing the evil hidden agendas of those in power. That's what the white magician is supposed to be doing. God is using the world to judge the world. And yes, Paul says that the saints will judge the world in 1 Corinthians 6, but that's not till after the resurrection. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, what do I have to do with judging outsiders? God judges those outside. And so if you're already engaging in judgment against the world, you're presumptuously taking on a post-resurrection responsibility, which essentially puts you in the same camp as the postmillennialists, who believe that they're already reigning with Christ, which likewise doesn't happen until after the resurrection. And so if you're judging the world right now, you're doing exactly what the postmillennialists are doing, acting as if you're already in the kingdom and that the resurrection has already happened. You're effectively adopting a kingdom now mindset. So Jezebel, in similar fashion, has people under her mind control, brainwashing them in her web of deceit, which are the exact same ways that the New Age conspiracy movement describes the Archons and the Illuminati. And you can hear that Gnostic theme of imprisonment or enslavement running through her description of Jezebel as the one controlling and manipulating the masses. Just like what the Archangel Metatron supposedly said through Ray Chandran about the Matrix being based on fear and control. And she even connects Jezebel with the deep state. In other words, the shadow government, the Illuminati. So these are all aspects of Jezebel's web, just as they are for the Matrix, because they are one and the same thing. And then at the bottom she says, Jezebel must be cast down and destroyed, which correlates with the New Age's call for the destruction of the Matrix, a foreshadowing of the destruction of Babylon by the beast. Here's another book by a so-called apostle, Robert Summers, called Harboring the Spirit of Jezebel, Caught in the Web of Destruction, with a spider and web on the cover. And then Hakeem Collins, another self-proclaimed prophet, in a video with false prophetess Jennifer LeClaire, also likened the Jezebel spirit and her network to a spider web. Listen.
That's what that agenda does, that spirit does. It makes it look good. It's masked. And so that is our job as of God and as apostles, is to rip the mask and to unmask Jezebel and to expose the agenda, to expose the intention. You were impressed with what you saw, and then now you're caught into a spider web, because that's what that system or network is. It's a spider web.
Who is the spider, this force which is not human?
That's what that system or network is. It's a spider web. It's a spider web.
The spider.
This web of lies is massive.
And millions and millions and millions and millions of souls are stuck in that web right now.
So they're all talking about the same thing. Under the delusion of lying spirits, they're using this shared analogy and terminology of the spider to refer to the Jezebel spirit, to the Archons, to the New World Order, etc., all of which points to Babylon. And you heard Hakeem also mention unmasking Jezebel, which, as I talked about last time, would be another synonym for unveiling or lifting the veil, and is another popular term that the false light uses when talking about exposing the dark side. There's this book by John Paul Jackson called Unmasking the Jezebel Spirit. Then here's the thumbnail for a video on unmasking the Jezebel spirit that says Jezebel Unmasked. And then a sermon series by Apostle Femi Lazarus called Unmasking Jezebel. And GoodFight Ministries is also using this terminology of unmasking in reference to Hollywood, as in their documentary Hollywood Unmasked. Hollywood being one of the main so-called strongholds of Jezebel and Babylon, and everything else associated with the Satanic New World Order that the false light is exposing. And as I mentioned last time, GoodFight talks about pulling back the curtain and diving into dark recesses, essentially asking you to go down the rabbit hole with them as they lift the veil on Hollywood. And Joe Schimmel calls out the cultural Jezebels, such as Oprah Winfrey, just like the rest of the false light does, instead of the Jezebels within the church leading Christ's servants astray, like Tina Griffin and Doreen Virtue, both of whom he embraces. Tip of the iceberg with GoodFight Ministries. And they're getting worse by the day. They've been taking up this war on children pretty hard, covering Epstein and the release of his updated client list, and talking about pedophilia with their false light partners like Doreen Virtue. And in addition to that, it appears they fully jumped on the Islamic Antichrist narrative, which their friend Joel Richardson has famously been promoting for years, who's also been getting quite chummy with Vladimir Savchuk. So yet another associate of GoodFight Ministries who fellowships with Vladimir Savchuk and the NAR. Hopefully I'll be able to talk about them more in depth later. But it's quite sad to see how they seem to be securing their own destruction. Next, this is Jay Widener. He's a New Age author, speaker, and filmmaker. And like David Icke and George Humphrey, he often references the Gnostic texts and has also made it his life's mission to expose the Archons, who he also believes are behind the Illuminati and all these satanic influence in our culture. This is a video he did on Gaia TV with a man named George Norrie on a show called Beyond Belief. And here he connects the Archons of Gnosticism with Hollywood, the media, and the Illuminati.
First time that we really hear about the Archons in history is in the Nag Hammadi texts, which were discovered in 1945 in Egypt. And one of the things that they talk about is a chapter called the Hypostasis of the Archons. And they say that there's a group of off-planet entities that have actually come to Earth and can get into people and change them. And these entities are attracted by violence and depraved sex, and they kind of almost like locusts in a fire, or coming in, they swoop in on violent situations, war, conflict, and encourage it. They feed off of it like food. And so the Gnostics who wrote the Nag Hammadi, they say that the Archons are fomenting all of this strife and war to create kind of a psychic food for them. And so we need to be aware of this, because they are kind of the manipulators behind a lot of the things that are going on these days, and can use their psychic abilities to infiltrate into the councils of humanity. They've taken over the top levels of humanity.
Are they what we call the Illuminati?
They are, and they kind of took over the leadership positions around the world 2,500, 3,000 years ago, and they've been in charge ever since. This is what the Hypostasis of the Archon said 2,100 years ago, so I'm not making this up. They don't understand us, so they create a fake culture too. This is very important, since they rule Hollywood and the media too, to completely in a way, take our children from us, which is what I think they're doing right now with pop culture. I think that they're literally creating artifices in pop culture that are removing our children away from us, alienating our children from us. That's really
social networking, everything.
And I think they're really trying to get the younger generation in their camp right now, so that they are.
That's an interesting take.
It is, and if you look at the music and the culture that they're fomenting onto the young people right now, it is downright evil. And so they're kind of jealous of us, and they're trying to keep us down on the farm, because if we ever realize who we really are, we will be stronger than they are, and we will defeat them.
And go after them.
Exactly, and so they know this, and so they do everything they can. They put fluoride in the water, and they give the kids, prescription drugs, and they're doing everything they can to flatten us out as a species, so that we never have enough knowledge, the spiritual power to rise up and tell them, we've had enough of your stuff.
So the Archons are the manipulators behind everything going on today. They've taken over the top levels of humanity. They're behind the Illuminati. They promote war. They put fluoride in the water. They control the media in Hollywood, which has some serious implications with regard to the Jews, as we'll explore more later. And I also found it very interesting how he mentioned the wicked music and entertainment that the archons create to negatively influence our children and take them away from us, because that's one of the main concerns today of the Christian evangelical community, as we talked about back in part 2 with this whole war on children. So very significant to see a Gnostic conspiracist like Jay Widener express the same concerns about the archons coming after our children that the Christian evangelical community has with regard to Satan likewise coming after our children, as so many have been saying lately. John Cooper of Skillet, Kirk Cameron, GoodFight Ministries, Matt Walsh, Alex Jones, Jim Caviezel, John MacArthur. Basically, the entire Christian conservative community has become engrossed in this idea of Satan is coming for our kids, which aligns with the image of the reptilian figure offering a child sacrifice to the devil-looking figure from this painting by Neil Haig, who is a good friend of David Icke. The war on children has arguably been the strongest rallying point of the false light movement, and will continue to be so. And along those same lines, Widener linked the archons with depraved sex, which lines up with the Jezebel spirit that the NAR believes is behind the LGBT movement. They'll often talk about how Jezebel promotes sexual depravity, like homosexuality and transgenderism. So some more disturbing parallels between Jezebel and the archons. Another clue to the Gnostic spirit behind all this, and the coming convergence upon a common enemy.
Oh, gosh, I'm just looking at some footage here. Innocent little kids. And by the way, the vast majority of men, drag queens, are gay men. The vast majority of them, not everyone, but the vast majority. And you're sending confusion to kids. One of them, gay man, said, yeah, we want to groom your children. We want them to be accepting of these things.
Two burly men, one rotund and bearded, wearing dresses and greeting small children and their parents. This is not the first time social media erupted upon reports of facial hair sporting men in dresses being seen working as greeters at Disneyland's boutique that caters for little girls.
It points a big light on grooming. A lot of that going on in the United States right now.
It's called grooming, you know, for what's going on with most people out there. It's called grooming. Men dressed up like women in elementary school. They're going after our children. I've studied these guys. It's like, man, they're after our kids.
I need to let you know that perverts are coming after your children. I said it. Perverts are coming after your children. No, it's not hyperbolic at all. Perverts are coming after your kids.
It's really, really a calling right now for men to step up and to understand that it is also a coming upon us to become the nurturers, to join the mama bears on the front line, because they're there because intrinsically the mothers know it's time to protect our cubs. Our children are being attacked.
Abusing children sexually, and in so many other ways, that seems to be fine with drag queens and blokes with beards in dresses.
All of this to me is just satanic.
Yes, that's it. It's satanic.
Notice Target literally put out shirts with an artist that says
believing in the devil. Yeah,
we are Satanists and we are going to recruit your kids and an adult
shirt with that.
A shirt. The designer was all devil, worship Satan.
LGBT,
Satan loves trans. Satan loves trans.
S for Satan.
Politicians we're seeing with the Epstein's Island and the politicians that have been involved in this sexual perversion on both sides of the aisle. We're seeing it with major companies. We're seeing it with major funders. We're seeing it with actors and actresses. We're seeing it in Hollywood and music.
Are you saying that this is an agenda from the top down, an agenda to indoctrinate our kids into perversion? Yes, 100%, absolutely, exactly right. That's what we're saying.
All part, isn't it, Disney, of perceptually manipulating little kids.
So when people like you, when people like me talk about this attack on children, this satanic going after children and the trans movement.
I think the thing that distresses me most is the war on children.
All of this is a war on our children.
This is so wicked what's going on.
And if you look at the music and the culture that they're fomenting onto the young people right now, it is downright evil. And
naturally, GoodFight Ministries is participating in this false light exposure For example, this video from 2022 called Famous Child Groomers Exposed. So there's that false light hallmark about Satan grooming kids. And then this one, exposing the Balenciaga scandal. More stuff involving pedophilia. And you can see just how much GoodFight Ministries focuses their judgment on the world. Because they, like most of the modern church, is simply too corrupt to judge itself. And so it turns its focus on judging the world, because that's where it finds its righteousness, in judging those worse than themselves, judging those who aren't even in the faith. And that's why GoodFight Ministries cannot properly purge the evil among themselves, like Tina Griffin and David Fiorazo, and many other compromised individuals that they're in ministerial partnership with. And this video was one of the more ridiculous things that I've seen, not just from GoodFight Ministries, but from the entire so-called Christian discernment community. He was circling Baal on the ad as if he was exercising some great discernment just because he could read the name Baal. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me. Chad Davidson has the spiritual discernment of Alex Jones. He's absolutely blind and taking the devil's bait like any typical truther would do. And for those familiar with my Jehu series, you already know how this exposure of Baal fits in with the rise of the Jehu movement, just as Jehu went to war against Baal and Jezebel, which is a picture of the beast taking down the harlot.
What relation does Baal have with children? Why would they put Baal in the front part of their name? Well, we can see in Jeremiah 32:35, it says, they built the high places of Baal, or Baal. They're in the valley of Ben Hinnom.
These spiritual beings, such as Baal and Moloch, which they still do ceremonies for today, such as in Bohemian Grove, there is a giant effigy, stone effigy of an owl. That's the god Moloch. The god Moloch goes all the way back to Rome and Carthage, in which they were offering child sacrifices to this god in exchange for power.
And speaking of that, Keenan Bridges, who's part of the NAR crowd and talks about taking down the Jezebel spirit, he's also put out some so-called words from the Lord about massive exposure coming. And many others have as well. Here's a similar video on Sid Roth's channel. Prophetic word, all will be revealed, with the thumbnail saying exposure is coming. And then here's this episode on Skywatch TV with Derek Gilbert, exposing the darkness. So the Archons, Jezebel, the Illuminati, the Satanists, the pedophiles, the New World Order, people all over the world are now exposing these things. The hidden things of Mystery Babylon are coming to light. As this New Age blog entry said, on that day, all of the truth that has been hidden from mankind for such a long, long time will finally come out into the open. So it's coming. The new Nazi movement is on the rise. And that same war against the international Jewish conspiracy that Hitler waged is now being waged by the New Age conspiracy movement, as well as much of conservative Christianity. Christian nationalists and dominionists are increasingly getting militant in their opposition to Marxist threats to Western society, and Karl Marx was a Jew. And then there's also an increase in the exposure of Freemasonry, which likewise stems from Jewish influence, as we'll talk about in part 6. And all other so-called Christian ministries and YouTube channels that are exposing Satanism are following suit with this movement, even if they're not making anti-Semitic statements and showing support for Israel. So again, it's always about the Jews. It's this growing tension between Jew and Gentile that has been building and building over the centuries, and it's going to reach a boiling point in the near future, when the beast system emerges and destroys Jerusalem the harlot. There's really no other good reason why the entire world would come against Jerusalem to destroy it, as Zechariah 14:2 says, other than the fact that it's seen as the headquarters of the New World Order, and that the Jews, or at least the ruling Zionist Jews, are the leaders of this international mafia that's caused so many problems around the world, and that Israel has reached such a level of wickedness that the Lord raises up the beast system of all things to bring judgment upon her. And that's why the founder of the Thule Society, which Adolf Hitler was influenced by, declared Judah, i.e. Israel, the Jews, as its main enemy. So Gnostic anti-Semitism is the common denominator that connects all of this. And as we'll be looking at in the next video, the Gnostic New Agers and Christians are gradually developing a bond over their shared anti-Semitic resentment of the Jew world order. So this should start to contextualize this growing exposure of the New World Order and of the Zionist Jews as the ones behind it pushing a globalist agenda. The ancient Gnostics exposed the Jews and their God, and so the modern Gnostic conspiracy movement today is exposing the Jews and their God. And whether it's Gnostics like David Icke, who believe that Yahweh is Satan, or the Christians who are caught up in this culture war and gung-ho about exposing Satanism, either way they're exposing Satanism, because David Icke says that Yahweh is Satan. And they're gradually uniting against this satanic threat, which ultimately points to Jerusalem, Mystery Babylon. And as you can see, this picture has all the typical conspiracy topics, like 9/11, 5G, elites like Klaus Schwab and Hillary Clinton and Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci, all of whom have been prime targets of the Great Awakening. For example, in this Great Awakening versus Great Reset picture from Clay Clark's Reawaken America tour, it's got Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates, among others, on the dark side. Haig also has organizations like DARPA and Moderna and Pfizer, also common targets of the Great Awakening. There's pedophilia over here to the far left, Satanism at the top, as is typical, along with a picture of the Vatican. Here's a Freemason symbol near the center, and it even has cancel culture over here at the top left, which has been one of the most frequent talking points of conservatives and evangelicals. In a mitigated or relative dualism, one of the two principles may be derived from or presuppose the other as a basis. For example, the Bogomils, a medieval heretical Christian group, held that the devil is a fallen angel who came from God and was the creator of the human body. Sounds like the demiurge. Into which he managed by trickery to have God infuse a soul. Here the devil is a subordinate being and not co-eternal with God, the absolute eternal being. This then is clearly a qualified, not a radical dualism. Both radical and mitigated types of dualism are found among different groups of the late medieval Cathari or Cathars, a Christian heretical movement closely related to the Bogomils. So once again, we have references to heretical Christian movements that have been influenced by Gnostic thinking and have thus adopted mitigated forms of dualism, where although the devil isn't on completely equal footing with God, he's still much more powerful than he's depicted in the Bible, as with the Bogomils, who believed that the devil created the human body, reinforcing yet again the notion that Gnostic thinking has been influencing Christianity all throughout history. So a key feature of dualism that sets it apart from how good and evil are described in the Bible is the elevation of the power of evil, where the power of the devil and or evil is much greater than it's described in the Bible. Whether it's radical dualism, where good and evil are equal forces, or mitigated dualism, where the forces of evil are subordinate to God, but still very powerful, like the devil creating the human body and being able to actually trick God into doing something, like the Bogomils believed. That's a far more powerful devil and far less powerful God than the Bible describes. So in either case, the power of evil is much greater than in the Bible. And these dualist concepts have been present in mysticism and heretical Christian groups all throughout history. And again, this is how good and evil are portrayed within conspiracy theory and the rest of the false light movement. This is something that I've mentioned before as being a feature of the false light movement. The devil is always given much more power than he should be, whether it's in Gnosticism or conspiracy theory or the NAR and deliverance ministry or the broader culture war in general. That's why the influence of Satanism is obsessively highlighted by the false light, whether it's New Agers like David Icke and Neil Haig, or Christian culture warriors like Sean Foyt and GoodFight Ministries, who are always pointing out satanic symbols in music performances, the Super Bowl, etc. They're effectively teaching a dualistic view of Christianity and spiritual warfare through their content because it elevates the power of evil. If the devil looms that large in your mind, as it does for GoodFight Ministries and its followers, then to you, he's far more powerful than he actually is. And again, this is how the conspiracy movement depicts the devil as well. This nearly all-powerful being who has his tentacles in virtually every aspect of society. The devil's controlling the government, the media, the corporations, and everything else. It's an exaggeration of the idea that Satan is the god of this world. And that's the conspiracy mindset, which is why truthers are so focused on pointing out Satanic and Illuminati symbols. Because in their mind, the devil is more akin to the devil of dualism than the devil of the Bible. And that's largely driven by their fear. And think about this. As I mentioned earlier, Neil Haig has Satanism on his Wetiko picture with all the conspiracy stuff. And Satanism has also been one of the biggest focuses of David Icke's career as well. And they clearly have a dualist worldview, right? That's without question. So it would be reasonable to say that New Agers like David Icke and Neil Haig expose Satanism so much because they have a dualist worldview. In other words, their exposure of Satanism in society is a direct outgrowth of their dualist worldview. That's clear and undeniable. They expose Satanism because they're dualists. There's no other possible explanation. And so what's the explanation for GoodFight Ministries and other Christian teachers and ministries exposing Satanism to the same degree that New Agers do? It's because they have the same dualist worldview that the New Agers have. They just hide it much better, under the guise of solid biblical teaching. And that is what makes them wolves in sheep's clothing, and thus far more dangerous than the New Age. Now, what's interesting about this description is that it lines up very closely with Goodrick Clark's account of the spread of conspiracy theory within the New Age movement. First of all, Gaia TV is a New Age site, obviously, and it has whole sections devoted to conspiracy topics, corroborating his statement about the endemic spread of conspiracy theory in the New Age. But even the specific things he mentions are also in the description. For example, Goodrick Clark says that they talk about hidden elites. Gaia TV mentions powerful elites. Goodrick Clark mentions UFOs and aliens. They also mention evidence of UFOs. And Goodrick Clark says that they talk about federal government covert or secret operations. And they too mention top secret societies, shadow governments, and cover-ups. So Gaia TV is a pretty solid and compelling corroboration of Goodrick Clark's insights. And keep in mind, although Gaia TV was around back in 2002 when this book was first published, it was still a long way from becoming a conspiracy hub, as that Elle magazine article called it. And yet, that's exactly what it's become. Also, their claim that they give you the real truth lines up with David G. Robertson's remark about conspiracists being a Gnostic third party defined by their special knowledge, and that they're leading a Gnostic war in which the truth shall set you free. This is what the truth movement is all about. Just like the Gnostic Gospels came along and essentially said, here's the real truth about Jesus. And the conspiracy movement uses that same ploy today, that they're giving you the real truth that the mainstream doesn't, which I might add is how GoodFight Ministries used to open their radio show.
Welcome to the Good Fight Radio Show, a program dedicated to bringing you vital and uncompromised truths that you won't hear in the mainstream media. Truths that you won't hear in the mainstream media.
Well, here's some other things that you don't get in the mainstream media. These are some of the conspiracy videos and documentaries that Gaia TV has in their Cabal section. Some of them topics that GoodFight and other big Christian ministries have been covering lately. And what's interesting is that in the interview I played of him in the last video, he recommends that people start at the bottom left where it says Escape the Matrix and where all the conspiracy topics are. So he's essentially saying that conspiracy theory is the gateway to spiritual ascension. That's how you get started. You get started with the conspiracies. This is why I keep saying that conspiracy theory is part of the New Age movement. And it's arguably the most effective way to bring someone into aberrant teachings, whether it's the New Age, heretical Christianity, or whatever else. The conspiracy stuff is often what makes the aberrant spiritual teachings seem more plausible and believable. And this is why the form of so-called evangelism that GoodFight Ministries and so many other false light Christian ministries employ is utterly false, because it mirrors the Gnostic New Age approach to spiritual conversion by constantly focusing on the overtly dark satanic stuff in society and using that as the avenue to spiritual awakening. This has always been the Gnostic approach. That's why GoodFight says that they give you the real truth that you don't hear in the mainstream media, or why they talk about diving into the dark recesses of the entertainment industry, or why they focus so much on Satanism, and why they repeatedly display poor discernment with regard to who they fellowship with. They are Gnostic Christians, effectively promoting a dualist view of the devil that elevates his power and influence, all to get views and likes and subscribers. If someone's spiritual conversion hinges on them learning about how dark and evil everything around them is, that's a sure sign that that person's spiritual conversion is fraudulent. If your spiritual conversion is about someone else's darkness, then you're likely not truly convicted about your own darkness. This is the same process that New Agers go through. Global conspiracies and elite satanic cults make them realize how dark and evil the world is, which then makes them realize how good they are, and they embrace New Age teachings. And any Christian group using this form of evangelism is no less dangerous than the New Age, because people who supposedly get converted this way are still blind to their own darkness. And that's why GoodFight are such massive hypocrites, getting more compromised by the day. As I covered in a video several weeks back, Joe Schimmel is now blatantly lying to his congregation to cover up the fact that he was in a documentary with Michael Brown. And they will continue to get worse. And the same thing goes for Spencer Smith, Mike Winger, Alyssa Childers, and scores of others. So he's all about tracing the lines of power that go all the way back to Egypt, up through the Vatican and Jesuits, and into our modern CIA and other intelligence agencies. That's what he's primarily concerned with. And the guy asked him at the beginning, how does this tie in with the Conscious Life Expo? And he responds by saying that learning about these darker aspects of history, meaning the history of the Illuminati, is a stepping stone to improving our world and expanding our consciousness. So in other words, conspiracy theory is integral to the New Age agenda of the expansion of consciousness, because the Illuminati have to be eradicated in order for the planet to improve. And so he sees conspiracy as just as important as all the other New Age and meditative practices that he implements, if not more so. And it's very similar to what Alexandra, the so-called Christian truther, said, that it's absolutely necessary to learn about all the characters in this show, and that that's part of the awakening.
While it is, in my opinion, absolutely necessary to learn the characters in this show, especially when you're waking up and trying to get out of the Matrix.
So learning about the dark, satanic aspects of society is necessary for spiritual awakening. And this goes back to what I said earlier about this being the modern church's approach to evangelism today. Leading them to Christ by showing them Satan. That's not how you do it. Because if someone comes to Christ that way, their conversion hinges on the darkness and evil of everybody else. And that's why GoodFight Ministries and their followers are constantly focused on the satanic aspects of society, because that's what their conversion hinged on. Chad Davidson has said this repeatedly, that he supposedly got saved through Schimmel's documentary, They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll. It's all about seeing how dark and evil everyone else is. Celebrities in Hollywood, rock stars, etc. It wasn't about conviction of their own darkness. If that's what it was about, then they would have been convicted of that long before seeing all the dark and satanic stuff. But no, it was about other people's darkness. That's not repentance. That's being the Pharisee in Luke 18. Thank you, Lord, that I'm not like all those wicked people. And that's why there's such hypocrites who are going from bad to worse. And Blavatsky's statement about the Jesuits being the most powerful black magicians is conspiratorial, not just because of the mention of the Jesuits, but also because of her statement that they owe their power and influence to their black magic. This is exactly what truthers say about politicians and celebrities, that they got to where they are because they practiced Satanism or sold their souls, a la Spencer Smith and GoodFight Ministries, and they sold their souls for rock and roll documentary. That's how the conspiracy mind operates. And we see that exact same line of thinking in Blavatsky.